Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Today, we have a guest joining us all the way from Scotland. So she's on the other side of the world from me. So, Vicky Smith, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and I love your accent. I know I have an accent to you as well. So, but I love your accent. And just take a moment to welcome our audience. Thank you all for being here today. We have, some pretty interesting conversations to share with you. And I'll give you a little bit of background on Vicky so that you know who you're actually or who I'm talking to and what you're going to learn in this discussion today. So, Vicky Smith she's very passionate about sharing her knowledge and has more than 20 years in the consulting industry, coaching, facilitating, and training in the workplace on well-being in locations across the globe. She holds a master's in organizational development, in psychology, and applied health and exercise. Because you just wanted to have everything, right, Vicki? And now she's working through her PhD, which I cannot wait to get into that and talk more about, but really doing her research around psychological safety in organizations. And that's a very hot topic right now and has been for probably, last couple of years, really. Like, how do we create these spaces where people feel psychologically safe? She's also qualified as an NLP trainer, psychotherapist, and executive coach. And because she didn't have, anything else to do, she decided to write a book. And she co-authored that with Leslie Cooper, founder of Working Well. And her book is called Brave New Leader. And so I'm excited to jump in and really talk about what that looks like and get into psychological safety. But before we go there, Vicky, maybe just give us a little bit of background on what led you to want to, get all these masters and this innate desire to learn, because that's what I'm reading is you've got a real passion for learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if I go all the way back to when I was at school, I actually really loved school. I loved the whole social aspect. I loved learning. And I was very, very sad to leave school. And I had to leave at 16 because our school didn't have in the UK, we have a sixth form, and our school didn't have that. So I went to college. And bizarrely, I actually trained to be a secretary because our careers advice was very limited back then. And so, I did that for a couple of years and was very, very quickly bored. And so got myself onto another course. This was a business studies course. And it just really fed my bug for learning. And I think I've been on one type of educational course or another most of my adult life now. And I am very, very passionate about learning, but also about helping other people to learn and to be their best selves. So I guess I haven't taken this traditional university route, straight from school to A levels to university. My route has been quite different. I've been very, very lucky to have some amazing managers who have really believed in me, seen my potential, sponsored me for certain qualifications, and has really helped me grow in confidence to kind of take the leap from full-time employed payment, which is very secure and very nice, and you have holiday pay and pensions and all this kind of thing, to kind of jump into going it alone and being a consultant, which is really scary. And so I guess it's been a combination of luck, of amazing managers, many of which were female, which has been fantastic. And also that, I think, just desire to want to keep growing and keep learning. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of been my route to getting me where I am today.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I think oftentimes, when we get out of school, many of us we don't want to take that on again. And I know for myself, I was in university at 17 and I went back to do my PhD just in the last 2 years. And the experience is completely different. And to your point, like that learning and constantly stretching yourself to see different perspectives. And it's so enriching and rewarding. Yeah, love it.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things I always say to people who come on my training courses is, wisdom comes from multiple perspectives. We
Exactly.
can step out of our own viewpoint and maybe see that we don't have to necessarily follow convention. There are multiple routes to kind of get you where you want to go, or even to just kind of go where the energy is and where you
Yeah.
feel drawn to. That's okay as well.
100%. No, 100%. I think that's happening more and more, because to your point earlier, when you said you studied to become a secretary, like, so many of us, like, it sounds like you and I are close in age. And so many of us actually, you were a teacher, you were a secretary,
Yeah.
like you didn't have a lot of options. Yeah.
It was very, very limited. And sadly, I listened to, my stepchildren and other young people. And, in some areas, I think the careers advice is still very, very similar, which is quite sad, I think, to some
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah. And the world is all about learning, right? Like, to your point, like
Absolutely.
what you expose yourself to helps to shape and shift your perspectives. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you're consulting, you're coaching, you're facilitating, you're doing your PhD. What are some of the biggest challenges that both individuals and organizations are facing today? Like, we're moving fast, faster than ever. So what do you see as those challenges?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. Change is happening so quickly, so frequently that, I talk to people in my capacity as a psychotherapist and psychologist, and people are just not having any sense of stability. Change
Mm,
is happening so frequently, they're just about getting their heads around one change, and then something else is coming along and changing everything that they were then changing in the first place. So it's this constant feeling of unsettled, this feeling of being unsettled in what you're doing and not knowing what the future looks like. Now, for some people, that's okay, because some people are hardwired to actually quite like that change. But there are, a huge group of people who find that extremely unsettling, very destabilizing, and don't cope with that very well. And of course, what
yeah,
that does then is put them under enormous pressure.
yeah,
And one of the things that I've found is, as human beings, most of us have this desire to want to help people, to be the best we can, to do a great job, to not let people down. And so, in addition to all of the pressure that is created from change, people put themselves under pressure internally not to let people down. And then they find they're in this predicament of, it's a choice. Do I not let the boss down, or do I not let the family down? And it's very difficult to manage. So I think that's one of the real key problems, the real challenges that individuals are having at the moment, is this balance between trying to do everything and please everybody. And as you say, you and I are of a similar age, and we're that kind of first generation to have both the child care and the adult care as well. So you're kind of
yes,
squashed in the middle, pressure from all sides, from family, but also huge pressure, in terms of the workplace and not letting people down. So I think that's a real challenge. And I think quite often it comes down to helping people understand some of their boundaries and how to hold those in place. And for organizations, I think it's really tough, because you see so many household names disappearing over the last sort of 5-10 years. So it's a really competitive marketplace, and organizations are hanging on with their fingernails,
yeah,
trying to survive in a very, very competitive environment where everybody is about cost cutting. And so an organization does what it thinks is best to try and stay, ahead of the competition, just to stay in the game sometimes.
yeah,
And I think what you're finding is that the pressure in organizations is squeezing everything to such a degree that it's very, very difficult for those who are in power in these organizations to really understand that these kind of reactions that create pressure feed all the way down to an organization and just exacerbate the problem. Because
yes,
what is an organization without people? And so this pressure to stay ahead, to be as competitive, to be as cost cutting and as efficient as possible gets pushed down and down onto the very people who are also feeling that pressure at a very real level. And it's just almost like the perfect storm. These the individuals are pushing themselves to such a degree, organizations are adding more and more pressure on top of that, and you're getting some very extreme reactions. If you look at the investment organizations make in terms of trying to look after people's health and well-being, it's enormous, and yet the problem is getting worse and worse.
I was just going to say that. I see it too, Vicky. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like there's so many initiatives in play, but it's just, it's like that time bomb getting ready to blow. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, part of trying to release the pressure, to create a pressure valve, if you like, is to help both at an individual level, but also at an organizational level and everything in between, teams, directorates, departments, to really understand that if you continue putting the pressure on, what you'll end up with is more and more people off sick, burning out, being stressed out, which puts everybody else under more pressure.
Yes.
So understanding the link between pressure and performance is really, really important. And if you can develop managers who are really in tune with their people, if you can develop a culture where individuals feel it's okay to speak up if they're struggling, you start to create a space where actually it's okay to say, look, I am under a lot of pressure, something needs to change. And then you can avoid some of these, potentially quite catastrophic events where people just don't turn up to work the next day because they're very, very ill, quite seriously ill in some cases. And so I think it takes great leaders to really truly understand the link between pressure and performance. But I think it takes brave leaders to actually do something about it, because what it means is you kind of have to look at what is the organization contributing to that pressure.
Yeah.
Because I think very often it's seen as it's a personal problem. If we can make you more resilient, if we can put you on a training course, if we can give you some support when you are ill, then it'll be okay. But of course, it's a bit like the dirty fish pond analogy. You can take all of the fish out of the dirty fish pond that are getting sick. You can put them in isolation tanks. You can clean them up. You can make them healthy. If you put them back into the dirty pond, they're going to get sick again.
Exactly.
So the brave part comes in terms of, let's look at what's making the water dirty. Let's look at how perhaps management, leadership, culture, how some of those systemic processes are all contributing to making the water very muddy and murky in the first place. So I think that is a big, big challenge for organizations, because it is a little bit like opening Pandora's box. And yet, I think it's one of the key things that could truly make a difference to releasing the pressure for people.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. And I love the metaphor you used there about the fish, because you're absolutely right. You can remove them and clean it up, but as soon as you put them back in, so you have to look at it much more holistically as to what's happening. And when you were saying that, one of the things that struck me was, when we came sort of out of the pandemic, we saw this great resignation, great reset. There was lots of different names, labeling what was happening. But I think, to your point, that was also some of it, because individuals were saying, I'm done. I can't do anymore. And I think there's also a bit of, it's a chicken and egg a little bit, right? Because you go to another organization thinking it's going to be different, and yet there's that internal work you got to do, to your point about the boundaries and the choices. And so it's a constant ebb and flow, trying to figure out, like, what are my boundaries so I don't take on more, right? And I loved what you said a minute ago, Vicky, because when you were describing, I was like, oh, she's describing me. About the overachiever and feeling responsible, and that you're going to let somebody down. And I just had a call this morning with my professor, and I said to him, I feel like I'm letting you down because I'm behind on my paper. And right? And so there is this internal drive that pushes us. So you've keyed in on a lot of aspects that I think are so prevalent in where we are at this moment.
Mm.
And so what do you so a couple of things I want to talk about.
Mm.
So what can employees and organizations do to create more of this psychologically safe space? I mean, that's what you're doing your research in. And so maybe even share a couple of, success stories of what you've seen so far that are working and might help others who are listening to the podcast.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that this label psychological safety kind of gets bandied around a lot. And for some people, it can in itself seem a little bit daunting, because what does it truly mean? And in actual fact, it isn't anything new. If you really dig into it, what we're actually talking about is creating an environment that is trusting. Now,
Yes.
the trouble with trust is, in terms of leadership development and culture and all that kind of stuff, trust has been done. We're over trust, we get it, we understand it, but actually, does it truly exist? And I
Yes.
think what psychological safety as a term does is to enable you to dig a lot deeper into what does that actually mean in practice. We talk about trust, but what do we really mean? And it's very multifaceted, because in terms of the thing that I'm really interested in around my research is you can create a team that is very psychologically safe. So what that means is everyone can turn up to work, they can be themselves, they haven't got to put on this work mask, they can say when they think there's a problem coming down the line, they can say they've got a great idea, they can say they're struggling without this fear of retribution or negative consequences, without fear of being shamed or ridiculed. They can genuinely be their authentic selves and feel that they have a voice. That voice is listened to. It may not always be acted on, but they are listened to, and therefore they are respected. So there's a great deal of trust within that team. However, what I find in my research is when you are lucky enough to work in a team like that, and let's face it, not all teams are like that.
Exactly.
When you are lucky enough to work in that kind of team, where psychological safety starts to break down is when you have to deal outside of the team. And let's face it, teams do not work in isolation.
They do not.
They're reliant upon other parts of the business. They have to work with teams from their customer organizations. They have to deal with suppliers. There are all sorts of other people outside of their immediate team that they have to deal with. And this is where I'm finding in my research a lot of people say that, yeah, it's great in my team, I've got a fantastic boss, my team are fantastic to work with, but it's as soon as I have to work with so and so or somebody higher up in my organization, that's where it all starts falling down. And again, I just think it goes to show that there's this real pressure from within organizations at a leadership level to really get results, to keep pushing for the results that are needed. And so that then is to some degree buffered by the manager if you've got a good manager, but then you have to look at how psychologically safe is the manager.
Yeah.
And then you have to look at what's the relationship like between manager and leader. So there are all sorts of levels where psychological safety can really start to break down. So little things that I say to teams when they're looking at how do we even start? We get it, we understand we need this trusting environment, but where do we start? So I say start with the little things. Start with, how do you interact with each other as a group of human beings who are all under pressure, knowing you're working in a climate that's extremely pressurized? What happens when you all start to feel the pinch, when that pressure really starts to increase? Does your behavior change? And it's little things like eyes rolling, the sideways glances to your colleague, the little side conversations, the being excluded from a particular conversation. Little things like that can really exacerbate when people really feel under pressure.
Yeah.
So there's something that I call I call it the dip. It's like the negative emotional dip. If you can imagine the Kubler-Ross change curve, it kind of comes from that, where lots of change goes on and the immediate response is denial. That's not going to happen, and then you get very angry about it. And then, of course, whether you like it or not, change happens, and people can start to slide into this negative emotional dip. And that's quite normal. It's normal to feel negative emotions. And actually, it's okay. There is no such thing as a bad emotion. Obviously, it's how we express those that can get us in trouble. But it's okay to feel those emotions. And then over time, you'll start coming out of that dip. You'll start trying new things, experimenting with ideas, and gradually that will normalize. But of course, what happens for some people is that's not always a straightforward journey through that process. For some people, as they start coming out of the dip, if they're trying things and they don't work, or, if they get those sideways glances or the eyes rolling at their suggestions, they might fall back into that dip. And then those normal human negative emotions can really start to intensify. And it's at that point that people are at risk of getting quite stressed and potentially burning out, and it really affecting their mental health. So at that point, if you continue with those behaviors that are not helpful, it's just going to fast track people to feeling quite overwhelmed. And then they're not going to turn up for work the next day. So you're under even more pressure. So what I say is, look out for each other. How do you know your colleagues are starting to get to that pinch point where they're feeling the strain of the pressure? What changes in their behavior? And really importantly, what can you do about it? And one of the best things you can do is to notice it and be brave enough to just have a conversation to say, look, you don't seem yourself today. Let's go and have a coffee. Let's go and have a chat. Let's see what's going on. And it's okay if they don't share anything. The point is, somebody has noticed. Somebody has taken the time and the effort to make the point that they've noticed and to open the door. And so sometimes it can be as simple as that conversation to help release the pressure. But of course, we're human beings, we're a lot more complex than that. But that's just one of the small things that can really make a huge difference. Now, when you get a whole team buying into that, and everybody starts to really understand what behaviors support psychological safety, because what we're talking about is being able to call out the kind of behavior that doesn't help. So that means being quite candid with each other. It doesn't mean aggressive. It just means to say, hey, hang on a minute. Look,
what's going on?
What's going on? That's not how we work. That's not how we operate. So you've got to feel quite secure, not only in yourself to do that, but you've got to feel secure and have that trusting relationship with all your team. When you get that, though, amazing things can happen. The team can really just feel like they're on a rocket booster to performance, because everybody buys into this is how we do things, and we do things in a supportive way, but we also don't accept mediocrity. And again, this is where I say that link between pressure and performance. The leaders that get it, they get it, and they know exactly. Really invest in creating this kind of environment. Wow, look at what can happen. I mean, we all know the great success story, don't we, around psychological safety, which is Pixar. Amy Edmondson wrote about it in her book, Fearless Organization, amazing book. Pixar is just a fantastic example of what psychological safety can do. So in the movie industry, it's very unusual to have 2 box office hits in a row. Pixar had at the time of the writing, I think Cantrell writing his book, it was something like 17 major box office hits. And part of his success is he talks about creating a psychologically safe environment, but keeps doing it. He does it through his own ability to be humble in the way he interacts. So he shares his mistakes, but he also creates processes that enable team members to be candid and to push back so that they don't accept mediocrity. And he knows human beings, we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Sure, as long as we learn. Right?
Exactly. And I think there is still, in many organizations I work with, there's still this real genuine fear factor around making mistakes. So you have to look,
100%.
why is that? Why are people still afraid to make mistakes? And of course, it's because of the consequences, either imagined, which then goes to the individual to say, okay, you need to work on your confidence, you need to work on your self-belief and do everything you can possibly do to make yourself resilient. But it also goes to the organization to say, what actually are the consequences? Have you got processes in place that are punitive, that punish people for making mistakes? And unfortunately, in some cases there are. But
Well,
where
and
it
it's even, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second there,
does,
Vicky, because what you just said there, I had a visual of a number of situations when I'm working with organizations. It's the implied, right? It might not be, verbalized, but there is some punishment that takes place, whether it's conscious or not. And so employees, they're smart,
of
they
course.
see it, they know it, and so there is this hesitation. But I think we've also scripted, a particular way that you should be showing up, which sometimes takes that human element out of it. And
Mm.
I love what you shared about the person from Pixar about being humble and sharing failures, because we are human beings and we all have our own reality. And a lot of times there's things impacting us outside of work, but it gets brought into our
Mm.
work environment, and vice versa. Our work environment,
Yeah.
if it's not a healthy, psychologically safe, it goes home with us as well. So to your point with the pressure, like it just builds and builds and builds.
Absolutely, you're spot on. And the thing is, you employ the whole person. The whole
Yes,
person turns up to work. It's very easy to say, leave your troubles at the door. That doesn't happen in reality.
not reality.
We bring it all with us. We bring it to work. We bring it back home again. So there is, and part of some of my master's research was very much about how far does resilience training go, and it will only go so far. You can, in a way, I think, delay the inevitable with resilience training, because the inevitable, if you work in an organization that doesn't genuinely support psychological safety, you're just pushing the problem a bit further into the future, but it will catch up
100%.
with you. It will catch up with you at some point. If you truly embrace it and say, actually, do you know what? If we encourage people to talk about what might be a failure in this proposal, or mistakes that are happening, and then we pick them apart and we learn from them without any hint of blame, because as soon as you go into blame,
100%.
you've lost psychological safety. It's like, forget it, it's game over. But if we pick it apart and we find not only the human errors but the systemic errors, the process errors, we can then learn from that and we can do things differently next time. So I think that's something that can really, really make a difference. Now, I've said this a lot to people and they say, okay, I absolutely get that. However, what happens when people don't learn from their mistakes? And I think that's a genuine question, which I think really deserves some conversation, because there are people who, no matter how much you do to support them through training, through coaching, ultimately there will be some people who are perhaps just not in the right jobs.
Yeah,
And so it doesn't mean that you have to be this nice person all of the time and be everybody's friend. It means you still have to manage performance effectively.
yeah.
But if you can do that in such a way that helps people to feel supported along the way and actually increases their confidence through the whole process, eventually they will find the right place for themselves where they can actually truly flourish, and you'll be able to get the right people into the job that are the real kind of the people that are genuinely able to do what you need them to do, rather than you feel like, I know some managers say they feel like they're pushing custard uphill with a fork, trying to almost reshape people into what they need them to be. And people want to try and change themselves into that, but it's square pegs round holes, that kind of scenario.
Absolutely. And that creates a whole spiral in itself,
Yeah.
because when you feel like you're not competent, then the confidence level drops and then
Yeah.
the engagement drops, and like it's a spiral. Yeah, so many things that you said there I think are super important and very much a reality, right? Because it is this balance. Like I had a mentor many years ago in my career, and he said to me, if you can't change the people, you change the people, right?
Hmm.
And so there is something very powerful and important about that statement,
Mm.
because you do everything you can to help people excel, right? Like we don't get up in the morning and go, oh, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure Vicky is a failure today, right? That's not what
Absolutely.
we do. I would hope that's not what we do, but most leaders are very in tune to how do I help Vicky be successful?
Hmm.
And so it's that shift then, if they're not, to your point, if they're not being successful in that role, what are their strengths? Is there
Mm.
somewhere in the organization that they would best be suited? And it's our responsibility as leaders to help find that.
Yeah.
Then if you can't change the people, right? Like if they've gone down that role, then you have to make a change. And sometimes it's the biggest gift you can give that person because you want them to be happy,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to say this, I think this can be a little bit contentious, because when you start then talking to HR people and they go down the route of, yeah, but that's seen as constructive dismissal. I'm like, hang on, this is about the best interests of the individual as well as the
And the
best
organization.
of the organization. How is that a wrong thing? So I think sometimes we need to take a step back and think, are we doing the right thing for the right reasons? And if we
Yes.
are, actually what HR should be doing is getting behind us 100% and really supporting that whole process of getting the right people in the right places so everybody can flourish. But of
Yes.
course, if you don't have an environment where it's okay to say, do you know what, I'm not really sure this job is the right place for me. If you can't say that, then you don't have that ability to help those people, and so you're going to go continuing on that journey of pushing custard uphill with a fork and putting pressure on people and feeling let down or frustrated because they're not doing it how you need them to do it. So psychological safety, when you get it right, it's absolutely amazing. And what I say to people is, think of a time, over your career when you had a boss that you would have bent over backwards for, when you loved working for that person, when that whole team was absolutely buzzing, and how good did that feel? And that is, a good example of what it feels like to be in a team that has psychological safety, because those teams thrive. They are your high performing teams, because they are high performing because everyone's themselves. Everyone can push back. Everyone can say when there's a problem. And that's when you get the amazing results. But of
I
course,
agree wholeheartedly.
very difficult when the pressure is on, and it only takes a chink in the armor of somebody feeling insecure, and that can start to fall away a little bit. So I think one of the best things you can do is to actually get your team together and just talk about it, have some frank and honest conversations and say, what doesn't help, what actually starts to destroy trust when the pressure is on, and when the pressure has been on, what has really helped us to get through these times. So you're learning from your own ways of working, and you can identify and pick apart the bits that are actually not helpful. This stuff, as we know, is not rocket science. It's not new. Sometimes we just need to take the time to have the conversations. And of course, a lot of people, the kickback is, we haven't got time. So,
I
you
hear it
kind of,
all the time.
yeah, you get yourself stuck into this vicious cycle where actually it's a bit like deferred gratification, isn't it? It's a little bit of pain now in terms of taking some time out, but the results will be so much better in the future.
Exactly. And there's an analogy I like to use. Oh, I'll go back to your fishing. Because one of the things that I use with clients often is, I can take you out and I can show you how to fish today and feed you today, or I can take you out and teach you how to fish so that you feed yourself for a lifetime. And that's ultimately what you're saying is how do we teach people to shift how we work together? And, being candid, as long as you're doing it from the heart space
Mm.
in the right way, you're giving a person a gift, right? Instead of being so afraid that how are they going to interpret this? You know, am I going to upset someone? Am I going to rock the boat? You potentially are giving them the best gift that you could give them by giving them that feedback.
I absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. You know, it's one of the things I always say as well. Feedback is the biggest gift you can give to somebody,
It
and
is.
yet, why are people so afraid of it? And I think it's because people worry about what the reaction may be. They open their mouths without actually thinking, how can I
Yes.
articulate the message to land for that particular person or that particular team in a way that it's meant to land? And so I always say to people that if you're worried about giving feedback, check in with yourself and ask yourself, is this coming from a place of good intention? You know, it
Yeah.
should always come from a positive intention. And if it's not, do not give it,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be helpful. And then, of course, for the person receiving, what I always say is, you know, who is best qualified to give you feedback? And it really throws people. They go, oh, me or everybody. And I go, well, actually, the people who are best qualified to give you feedback are the people that you respect. Because if somebody gives you feedback that you don't respect, why would you want to take it on board? Because you don't want to be like
Exactly.
them anyway.
Love that.
So, you know, always choose to take feedback on board from people that you genuinely respect. And then you will know it's coming from a place of positive intention and it's designed to help you. And then you need to take that feedback on board and you need to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. But that also plays back to what you were saying about the psychological safety. If you feel psychologically safe, you can do that. If you
Yeah.
feel people are out to get you, then you interpret it completely different. So
Yeah.
it's that getting to the core of why there's not psychological safety. Wow.
And that's why, you know, just to sort of finish that point, that's why I have a bit of an issue with tools like 360 feedback, because it can be used as the passive aggressive way to have a go
Yeah,
at
good point.
people. And also, if you're just given this report without really truly understanding what that feedback means, it can do even more damage.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think if you are going to use tools like that, which I think can be extremely helpful, on the flip side, I think they can be extremely dangerous. If you are going to use them, you need to make sure that people really understand the purpose. The purpose is to boost people, to help them grow and develop, not to cut people down.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And we're wired, like, and this might be part of your research, Vicky, I don't know, but we are wired
Mm.
as human beings to typically see the negative,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And like that's one of the things I work on with clients is being conscious as a leader and what are the other possibilities of what that comment could actually mean, right?
Yeah,
Or how your interpretation of it might not be the intention of the person giving it. So asking, to your point, asking the questions. If you're not clear, ask, right?
yeah.
So I know I'm just cognizant of our time, but so what are you hoping, Vicky, will come out of your research and what is that impact you really want to have on society?
Sure. I mean, what I'm really, really hoping is that people will understand that in order for organizations to really thrive in this very, very competitive marketplace where, you know, organizations are struggling simply to stay alive, I'm hoping that they will understand that in order to be the best, to stay ahead of the competition, it doesn't have to be at the cost of their employees.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that they will lift the lid of Pandora's box and look at not just the individuals in terms of what they can do to help themselves manage pressure and to be more resilient, but genuinely look at what have we created in terms of the culture, in terms of the systems we have in place, in terms of the systemic behaviors that have been
Mm,
ingrained within the organization, and to really turn the lens on themselves and to not be afraid to look at how they can start making some changes at that kind of deeper, more structural level. Because I do think as I said, there's been so much amazing investment and so much amazing work done in the field of health, well-being, resilience, really helping individuals. But there haven't been too many organizations that have really been brave enough to turn the lens, at the organization itself as an entity and say, well, how does that HR process put more pressure or less pressure on people? How does that leadership training and the message running through that training help or hinder psychological safety or put more or less pressure on our managers? That's what I'm really, really hoping, is that we can look at how we run organizations and to realize that we don't have to be so cutthroat that everything is all about shareholder maximization and profit maximization, that we can still be really effective, profitable organizations, but we can also be ethical organizations when it comes to truly, genuinely looking after our people, so that people really value going to work in that workplace, or the hybrid working, or just being part of that organization. Because I think as human beings, we naturally want to be very, very loyal. But of course, if we don't have that psychological safety and that ability to look after people, over time, people start to get resentful. And I think one of the worst things that happen is that people turn up to work with a complete lack of emotional connection.
Yeah.
They have stopped caring. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things for managers to manage. It's people who are disengaged, because they just turn up now, they're clock watching, they just want the salary. And that's it. But if you can capture people's reason for coming to work, the wanting to do a great job, the wanting to be part of a team, the feeling proud of being a part of this organization, that's when you can really start to look at creating something that maximizes the value of each individual as well as the value of the organization itself. And I think that's my hope for society, is that we don't have to put profit literally above all. We can be profitable as well as really, really good employers.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. And that's a great way to wrap us up today. And I totally agree with you. Like, if we spent as much time focused on that, like, just think about how the performance would escalate. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So Vicky, if people want to learn more about psychological safety, would they do that through your book, The Brave New Leader? Like, I know that would give them some tips, right?
Yeah, it absolutely will. I mean, the book has been written to sort of set the scene in terms of why are things getting worse? We're investing so much, but why is the situation getting worse? As well as to offer a very, very practical and pragmatic way to start that journey or continue that journey towards developing psychological safety within your own organization, whether it's for you as an individual and doing what you need to do, or whether you're a manager, or whether you're actually leading an organization. It's kind of been written so that it appeals to anybody who is in the workplace. And part of the book is about how to develop the strength of character, that real inner strength you need, that courage, that bravery to kind of stick your head above the parapet sometimes and do what you know is right, whether it's right for yourself, right for your team, right for your organization. So it's written in a very pragmatic way, but also is a very sort of individual journey, as well as lots of practical tips around, if I'm leading an organization, where's my starting point? What can I do? What kind of quick wins can I build? So that's definitely one way of finding out on a practical level. But then, of course, there are lots of other great books out there. As I say, The Fearless Organization. There's a lot of resource now coming into the marketplace to help organizations to really understand what psychological safety means, because I think some definitions focus very much on sort of diversity and inclusion, and it's so much more than that.
It is.
Yeah. So yes, there's a lot of resources now that are out there that people can tap into. But I think the first thing is really to just start having conversations with your team members. If you're a team manager or a team leader.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. Great way to Great way to wrap us up today. So, Vicky, thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful. You and I are on the same page, that's for sure.
I thought we were, yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And there's so much richness in the conversation today. So whoever is listening, like, take some of these nuggets and even do a self-check with your organization, right? Like, where are those pain points? Where are those acceleration points, emotional points? Like, really do an evaluation of how your organization is leading in the industry. And to your point, like, everything that is accelerating so fast, it's imperative that we pause enough to step back and say, okay, what do we really need to be doing? Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Awesome.
thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been a lot of fun. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about the
I
whole
can
thing.
tell, and I love it. Your passion came through very, very clear
Thank you.
today. I love it.
And it's nice to talk to somebody who really gets it as well. And as you say, absolutely on the same wavelength. So thank you
Yeah.
very much for inviting me to come along and talk today.
Well, we loved having you. And where can our audience find you, Vicky? Where are the best channels they can locate you?
Yeah, sure. So if you go onto our website, which is workingwell.co.uk, you can find my profile there. I'm on LinkedIn, so you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, very, very easy to contact either via our website or via LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect, perfect. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our audience for being here today. Thank you all for joining in and listening to the podcast. If you have questions for Vicky, reach out to her. You can find her on LinkedIn, as she said, or on their website. Or if you have questions for me, you can reach me at willempowered, that's 1L.com. And, if you're interested in figuring out how you show up as a leader, we have a free leadership quiz on our website. So feel free to take that. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what insights you gain from it. It is free, and that's on the Will Empowered website, and that's 1L. So we look forward to seeing everybody on our next podcast. And Vicky, thank you again for being here. It's been a pleasure having you join us.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take care. Take care,
Take care.
everyone. Bye
Bye.
for now.